When you think about the most dangerous bear species, you're probably picturing a polar bear. I mean, they're massive, they hunt large prey, and if one decides your food, that's pretty much it. Or maybe you're even thinking about a brown bear, also massive, huge claws. They're the ones you sometimes hear about attacking hikers in North America. And honestly, that makes sense. They're both big, powerful predators. But here's the thing. Being the biggest bear doesn't automatically make you the most dangerous. Because when we talk about most dangerous, we have to ask, dangerous to who? When we're talking about danger to humans, the answer isn't actually the polar bear. It's not the brown bear either. It's a species most people barely even think about, the sloth bear. Sloth bears live in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. They're much smaller than brown bears, they don't hunt people for food like polar bears, and they honestly look kind of strange compared to other bears. But despite all that, they're responsible for more attacks on humans than any other bear species in the world. But why is a much smaller, non-predatory bear at the top of this list? Once you understand the reason behind it, it all starts to make sense. First of all, before we start comparing species, we need to define what we actually mean by dangerous. It's easy to assume the biggest bear automatically takes that title, but that's not necessarily how it works. Danger isn't just about size, it's about a combination of factors. I would break it down into three main criteria. The first is size and power. How big is the bear? How strong is it? How much damage can it physically do if it decides to attack? A larger bear with greater muscle mass, stronger jaws, and longer claws clearly has the potential to cause more harm in a single encounter. On paper, this is the most obvious factor, and it's usually the one people think about first. The second factor is predatory behavior and aggression. Does the bear see humans as potential prey? Most bear attacks around the world are defensive, meaning the bear feels threatened, surprised, or is protecting cubs or food. And that's very different from a bear that actively hunts large mammals and might view a human as a food source. A species that is willing to attack for food carries a different level of risk than one that is only reacting out of fear. And finally, there's human conflict frequency, how often the species actually comes into contact with people, and how often those encounters turn into attacks. A bear can be incredibly powerful and highly capable of killing a human, but if it lives in remote areas with very little human overlap, actual attacks may be rare. On the other hand, a smaller species that often shares space with dense human populations may end up injuring far more people overall. So, when we talk about the most dangerous bear, we're not just asking which one is the strongest. We're looking at physical capability, behavioral tendencies, and how frequently that species has conflict with humans. And once you look at all three together, the answer becomes a lot less obvious than most people expect. Alright, so now that we have those three criteria, size and power, predatory behavior and aggression, and human conflict frequency, we can start applying them to the bears most people think of. Let's start with the polar bear. In terms of size and power, the polar bear clearly ranks at the top. It is the largest bear species on Earth, with adult males weighing well over 1,000 pounds, or about 500 kilograms. They have massive forelimbs, strong jaws, and are built to overpower large animals. Physically, there's no question that a polar bear has the capacity to kill a human with relative ease. When it comes to predatory behavior, polar bears also score very high. Unlike most other bear species, they actively hunt large prey, and in rare cases have stalked and attacked humans as a food source. That alone makes them uniquely dangerous compared to more defensive species. But the third factor, human conflict frequency, changes the picture entirely. Polar bears live in some of the most remote regions on Earth, the Arctic, and the Arctic has an extremely low population density, and most encounters happen near small northern communities or research stations. As a result, despite their size and predatory nature, actual attacks are very rare on a global scale. So, while polar bears rank extremely high in physical capability and predatory behavior, they fall much lower when it comes to how frequently they clash with humans. And brown bears tell a slightly different story. In terms of size and power, brown bears are still very formidable. Adult males can weigh up to 600 pounds or about 300 kilograms. With powerful jaws and long claws designed for digging during foraging and for fighting, so they're more than capable of seriously injuring or killing a human. Physically, they're among the most powerful land mammals in their native ranges. However, when we look at predatory behavior, most brown bear attacks are defensive rather than predatory. They typically attack when surprised, when protecting cubs, or when guarding a food source. True predatory attacks on humans do occur, but they're very uncommon. In most cases, brown bears would rather avoid people altogether. And again, human conflict frequency becomes the deciding factor. Brown bears share space with hikers, hunters, and rural communities, so encounters do happen. But overall, the number of attacks per year remains relatively low. In most regions, however, bear spray, awareness campaigns, and habitat management have further reduced encounters. So even though brown bears are powerful and occasionally aggressive, they're not the bear species most frequently involved in violent human conflict. And when you apply the same framework here evenly, it becomes clear that the biggest and most intimidating bears don't automatically take the top spot. Because being the most dangerous isn't just what a bear can do, it's about how often it actually does it. But let's look at the sloth bear now, the species at the top of the list. Sloth bears are generally solitary animals and are most active at night. Fully grown, they can reach around 6 feet in length, and adult males typically weigh about 300 pounds or about 150 kilograms. That makes them significantly lighter than a brown bear, and nowhere near the size of a polar bear. In terms of raw mass alone, they don't look particularly intimidating. But while a brown bear's danger comes from the sheer size of the animal, a sloth bear's danger comes from how quickly and aggressively it responds at close range. Physically, they look very different from the more classic image of a bear. They have an extremely shaggy black coat, a cream-colored snout, and most individuals have a distinct whitish V or Y marking on their chest. Compared to the thick, muscular build of a brown bear or a polar bear, sloth bears almost appear lanky and strange. Diet-wise, they're also very different from the large, meat-eating polar bear or the omnivorous brown bears. Sloth bears feed predominantly on termites and ants, and have evolved a specialized method to extract them. Their long claws are used to break into termite mounds, which can be almost as hard as concrete, and once they open a hole, they blow away loose dirt and then loudly suck up the insects through a gap in their front teeth. They can even close their nostrils while feeding, using their lips almost like a vacuum nozzle. Beyond insects, they also feed on fruit and flowers. They will sometimes climb trees to knock down bee honeycombs and then feed on the honey, a habit that has earned them the nickname honey bears. So unlike polar bears, which are built to hunt large mammals, or brown bears, which rely on strength and size to dominate their environment, sloth bears are specialized insect feeders. On the surface, that makes them seem less dangerous. But, as we'll see, diet and appearance don't always predict how dangerous a species can be when it comes into contact with humans. One global study, covering 5,440 cases of attacks from 1950 to 2019, recorded 1,337 attacks by sloth bears, which put the sloth bear at the top of the list, even above tigers at 1,047 attacks. Plus, the sloth bears were far above all the other big cats and canines. That puts them ahead of species people might instinctively consider far more dangerous, like lions, wolves, and of course the brown bear and polar bear, which had 664 and 23 recorded attacks, respectively. And one very important reason for their high numbers of attacks is that 90% of the sloth bear population lives in India. And India, being the most populated country in the world, leads to encounters becoming more frequent. But it's not just population size that drives these encounters, it's how the land is being used. Across much of India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, forests are increasingly fragmented into smaller patches by roads, farms, villages, and expanding infrastructure. Sloth bears often find themselves living along forest edges, where agricultural fields press directly against their habitat, and farmers there collect firewood, graze livestock and tend crops, right beside areas where bears forage for termites and fruit. And this ultimately leads to surprise encounters for both parts. Plus, sloth bears have surprisingly poor eyesight and hearing. Often, they don't even notice humans until they're already too close. And it is that sudden surprise that can trigger an immediate defensive attack. If the sloth bear, like most other bear species, spots people in time, it usually runs away instead of fighting. Sloth bears are naturally shy and prefer to avoid confrontation whenever possible. But even though their poor eyesight and hearing can explain why they let humans accidentally get too close, that still doesn't explain why they're so prone to attacks when that actually happens. There was a very recent study in 2024 that most likely got to the bottom of this mystery. The sloth bear's very defensive nature is an anti-predator behavior refined over millions of years of sharing the landscapes with big cats, including today's Royal Bengal tiger. And Bengal tigers, together with Amur tigers, are the largest cats alive today, and they do prey on sloth bears. Plus, the bear's specialized feeding habits puts it at particular risk. The bear shuffles through forests, woodlands, scrub and grasslands with its nose to the ground. The sloth bear searches for insect nests, blowing away dirt and sucking up termites and ants. It's a highly focused method, which means the bear is not exactly constantly vigilant, and a patient stalk and ambush hunter like a tiger can often get to a striking distance without ever being noticed. Most encounters between tigers and bears, however, never escalate to physical contact. If the bear spots a tiger from medium or long range, they respond in a mix of ways. Sometimes running, sometimes standing still and watching the visible tiger. But when a tiger comes within 3 meters, the sloth bear almost always reacts defensively. It rises on its hind legs and charges, and this strategy is very effective, often forcing the tiger to reconsider its attack. Evidence suggests that modern tigers had crossed the Himalayas by around 20,000 years ago, spreading across India soon after. Sloth bears, whose range has largely stayed within present-day India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Nepal, have been dealing with tigers ever since. They have also coexisted with Asiatic lions, which once roamed much of the region. But sloth bears are an ancient lineage, millions of years old, and they faced enormous felines long before tigers or lions ever arrived. Their timeline and range overlapped with saber-toothed cats like Dinophalis and Megatherion, as well as the Eurasian jaguar. And the sloth bears being oversized by those felines and unable to climb trees to escape, they had to develop a bold charge style of defense to survive. This study really drives home one simple truth. The danger isn't that sloth bears are out to get humans, it's that people and bears too often stumble into each other. Over thousands of years, sloth bears have evolved a very easily triggered defensive system. But today, most sloth bears live in landscapes together with people, and people walking along a trail can unknowingly come within a few meters of a head-down ant-sniffing bear, essentially the same distance a tiger might sneak up on its prey. And if that does happen, the bear reacts just as it always has, explosively, defensively, and often dangerously for the human who's suddenly too close. But coexistence with sloth bears ultimately comes down to reducing surprise encounters. Local communities are encouraged to practice bear safety, such as making noise while walking through forested areas, so that the bears are alerted to human presence in advance. And clearing thick bushes and dense shrubs along field edges and roadsides improves visibility, making it easier for both humans and bears to see one another from a safer distance. These small changes can significantly lower the risk of accidental close-range encounters. In addition, researchers have developed a specialized tool designed specifically for sloth bear country, a reinforced stick known locally as the Ganti Kati. I'm so sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but it's called bell stick in English. The bells serve as an early warning system. producing sound as a person walks, and alerting sloth bears to human presence. And in the rare event that a bear does approach too closely, the blunt spikes can be used defensively to create space without causing lethal harm, allowing both the person and the bear to separate safely. And hundreds of these sticks have already been distributed to tribal communities and forest patrol staff in sloth bear habitats. And early feedback seems encouraging. Reports actually suggest the tool not only reduces encounters with sloth bears, but also deters other wildlife, such as wild boar and even leopards, simply by announcing a human's approach before a sudden face-to-face meeting can accidentally occur. So in the end, the sloth bear isn't the most dangerous because it's aggressive, it's the most dangerous in certain parts of the world because it's extremely defensive. For millions of years, that fast, explosive reaction kept it alive against predators like big cats. Today, that same reaction sometimes plays out when a human accidentally gets too close. But here's the important part. When sloth bears see people in time, they usually just leave. Most of the time, sloth bears want nothing to do with us. Yes, there have been a few rare individuals, like the sloth bear of Mysore, that killed multiple people, but those types of individuals are incredibly rare. So maybe the sloth bear isn't the most dangerous bear in the way we first imagined. Maybe it's just the clearest example of what happens when ancient survival instincts collide with a modern, crowded world. I want to end this video by saying that I think coexistence is absolutely possible. With better awareness, education, and simple precautions, conflicts can be reduced. Like most wildlife issues around the world, it comes down to understanding and respect. Sloth bears aren't monsters, they're just a unique species reacting the way evolution shaped them to. If you like this one, give it a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. Why not? Have a good rest of your day, and see ya.